to talk about from citation analysis to large language models, how can bibliometricians support research evaluation? Okay, so in the context of Eugene Garfield, he was a pioneer, as we know, and he also had a lot of interest in artificial intelligence. So his main work was maybe more standard computing based, but artificial intelligence was long an interest of his. So this topic does match with things that he has talked about in the past. So I'm going to give three related mini talks. I'm going to talk about evidence that large language models scores can be useful research quality indicators. I'll mention a quick application of large language model scores for OpenAlex very quickly, and then I'll discuss citations against research quality, and then I'll discuss alternative definitions of research quality with ChatGPT. Okay, so first of all, evidence that large language model scores can be useful research quality indicators. So this is really the heart of the talk, this part. And for this talk, I'm going to discuss the UK Ref 2021 because this is the data that I used for my study. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about this data, and then for several slides afterwards, I'm going to discuss some results with this data. So Ref 2021 was a huge scale peer review exercise in the UK, which used 1,120 experts to assess 185,000 research outputs. And each one of these outputs, most of which were journal articles, were given one of 4 scores for quality, for their research quality. So the highest score was 4-star, world leading, and the lowest score was 1-star, recognized nationally. And the UK's block funding for research was given based on those scores. So if you didn't get at least a 3-star, you got no money at all for your research. You only got money for 4-star or 3-star. So it was a very important exercise for the UK. And the scores were given by these experts who were given guidelines about how to score outputs. And I used the guidelines given to the experts as the instructions for ChatGPT. And essentially, I asked ChatGPT to do the same job as the experts with the same instructions. And we'll see how that worked. And the reason why we might want to use large language models like ChatGPT instead of 1,100 experts is because it takes a lot of time for the experts to do the assessment. So it took them a year. And you imagine it's very expensive to take a year of time from over 1,000 of the experts in the country to do this assessment. Of course, they didn't work on it full time, but it represents hundreds of millions of pounds of time spent on doing the assessment. So if we can automate it, then we'll save a lot of money that maybe we can spend on research. So that was the motivation behind the study. And these are the instructions that I gave to ChatGPT. So these are essentially almost identical to the instructions that were given to the humans. So on the screen, you can see the first half a page of instructions, but the full instructions took a page and a half. And the only difference between the ChatGPT instructions and the human instructions is the first sentence. So the first sentence for ChatGPT starts with, "You are an academic expert." And for the human experts, they didn't need to be told that. So that phrase wasn't there. So the sentence started differently, but finished the same. And the rest of the guidelines are identical for the human and the computer. So I haven't done anything clever in terms of giving instructions to ChatGPT. I've given it almost the same as the humans were given. So it's almost the simplest thing you could do with ChatGPT for this task. And this is an example of the output that ChatGPT produces. So given the instructions we saw on the previous slide and fed with a journal article, this is the type of report that it produces. So it often summarizes the article and then discusses its originality, significance, and rigor. And then it discusses what scores it might be given. And in this case, it finishes with this article is assessed to be 3-star quality, indicating that it is internationally excellent. So it's finished off with a recommendation for a score. So I've read over 1,000 of these reports now from ChatGPT, and all the reports look plausible from ChatGPT that I've read. So they occasionally contain tiny mistakes, but they all look like reasoned discussions of the article by someone with a level of expertise about academic research. So when I first read these, I thought this is incredibly impressive. All these reports automatically produced by a computer program are incredibly impressive score or a 4-star score, and it decides to give it a 3-star score. So the report itself looks to me very convincing. If you'd have told me this was written by a human expert, I would find that believable. But the question I have is the score prediction correct or not? So it's predicted a 3-star quality score. So is that the right prediction? And in general, does it tend to give the right score, or does it tend to give the wrong score, or does it just give a random score for these? So I compared the ChatGPT score predictions with the human expert scores to see whether they correlated. So that's this graph. So this is the scores from ChatGPT 4.0, and it's correlating against the scores for the articles. So in fact, I don't have the human expert scores for the articles, so I'm using the departmental average score as a proxy. So this is information that is available, but the individual scores for the articles aren't available. So this graph on the x-axis, I've tried to correct for the human scores, the individual scores not being available. So essentially, this is an adjusted correlation, an adjusted Spearman correlation between the article score from the human experts and the article score from ChatGPT 4.0. And you can see here on the y-axis, you can see the names of the 34 fields that we use for assessment in the UK. So in the UK, we have 34 fields. We call them units of assessment. For example, 8 is chemistry, 9 is physics. I'm in number 34, communication, cultural and media studies, library and information management. So that's where bibliometrics would go. And for each field separately, I've calculated the correlation between the ChatGPT score and the expert score. And also I've done the same for citation rates using the NLCS formula. So the citation rates correlation, just for comparison purposes, is the white dot with a green border, and the ChatGPT correlation is the blue dot. And we can see that in all fields except one, classics, ChatGPT scores, they're not random, but they do correlate positively and statistically significantly in nearly all cases with the expert scores. So it is doing, it's not randomly guessing the scores, but it is giving a score that is that positively associates with the human score. So it's not always the same as the human score, but it's better than guessing. And it's also, in most fields, it's better than taking the citation rate. So if you had to guess the score of an article that you didn't know anything about, and you were given its citation rate, and you're also given its ChatGPT prediction, for most fields, for 2/3 of fields, you would have a better guess if you took the ChatGPT score. So it's a little bit of a strange result. Yeah, it's a little bit of a strange result. ChatGPT is not always right. It's not always wrong. And it's right more often than it's wrong. And it depends on, varies between field in the proportion of times it's right more often than it's wrong. But in general, it's better than citation rates, which is a surprising finding. And another thing that's surprising about this result is that I haven't given the full articles to ChatGPT for this. So for this graph, I've just given it the title of the article and the abstract. So it hasn't even read the article. It hasn't assessed the full text of the article. It's just made a guess at the score that it would be given by an expert based on the title and the abstract. So it really is a guess. And even with this guess, it's a pretty good guess on average, and slightly better than guessing from the citation rate on average. So it's quite an impressive achievement for ChatGPT. So we could use ChatGPT on this basis as a replacement for citations if we wanted to, and it does have some advantages over citations. The main advantage is that you can calculate a ChatGPT score the minute an article is published, whereas for citation-based indicators, you need to wait 2 or 3 years after the article is published to see how often it's cited. And that's a problem if you want to do an evaluation of recent research, because the citation data will be too young, not available yet. So ChatGPT is really good for new research in particular. And we hope that we can get even better results with large language models in the future by extending to full text analysis. Okay, so another graph of similar data. So for this graph, I'm not comparing the fields. The previous graph compared the fields of research, and this graph compares different large language models. So as I'm sure you know, there are many, many, many different large language models here. And the main one I've used is ChatGPT 4.0 or ChatGPT 4.0 Mini, which is the cheaper, smaller version. And this graph shows on the y-axis the names of a range of different large language models. So here, the ones in the dark blue color, these are large language models that you can download and run on your own computer if you've got a big, powerful computer. And the light blue ones are cloud-based models that you can only use through a web browser or through another interface to the cloud. And here, the citation-based correlation is the orange bar. So we can see that one of the downloadable models and most of the cloud-based models do a better job at correlating with expert judgment than do citations. And all the ones I've tested, except for the really small one at the top, Gemma 3, this is a Google model, and this is the smallest one I've tested. They all have reasonably strongly positive Spearman correlations with expert judgments. So this is it isn't for all of science, this is just for the health and life sciences, this graph. So the bigger large language models tend to be better, but except for the smaller ones, even all the large language models seem to have some capability for assessing or guessing research quality scores. And again, this is just from the title and abstract. And I've tried a few special techniques in this graph that I haven't in the previous graph. So the two special techniques I've tried, one is a few shot technique. So this is a technique where the large language model is given some examples of articles with their correct scores before it is asked to assess a new article. And that helps a little bit in some cases and a lot for one of the models. And it doesn't make much difference for some of the cases as well. And then the other variation I've tried is I've asked the large language model, ChatGPT, to estimate the probability that it would give different scores to an article. So I haven't just asked it for one score, which is the score it recommends, but I've asked it for what's the probability that the article could be a 4-star, a 3-star, a 2-star, or a 1-star. And that also helps a little bit. So that's a kind of a cleverer way of, or a better way of getting the score from the large language model. So we're starting to find cleverer ways to get the results from the large language models. So I think we're going to continue to improve their performance from an already strong performance that we've already seen. Okay, so I just want to address one question. So some people sometimes ask me why positive correlations are useful. Why don't I look at other types of information? And so my answer here is, well, 3 answers. Firstly, positive correlation shows that the large language model scores are genuinely related to research quality. So if they're random numbers, then we would expect a 0 or a close to 0 correlation. But all the scores are positive that we've seen, correlations are positive, sorry. So they do have some relationship to research quality. And also a positive correlation implies that a higher large language model score is more likely, an article with a higher score is more likely to be better than one with a lower score. So if we're using the scores to support expert judgment, then this is exactly what we need. We want the indicator, the score, to give us a better chance than random guessing at giving the right judgment. And the higher the correlation, the more likely it is that the score prediction is correct. Good advice to the experts. Okay, and the third one, a more technical one, the higher the correlation, the smaller the number of articles that you can compare to if you need statistically significant differences between groups for your test. So there's a statistical reason why the higher correlation is better as well. So happy to answer questions about that at the end as well. Especially if you disagree, tell me if you disagree with this. Okay, so second thing I want to mention is for that the large language models, although they generally work well, they do give some bad results. I'm going to give some examples of bad results from the large language models just to show how that can happen. So these are from the reasoning version of DeepSeek, and it's one of the smallest versions of DeepSeek that you can download to your own computer. And in the first three cases, it gives the score on the wrong scoring system. So I've given it a four scale scoring system, and in the first example, it scores 7 out of 10. So I can't use 7 out of 10. The answer has to be 1, 2, 3, or 4. And in the second answer, it gives 4 out of 5. Again, that's the wrong scoring system. And the third answer is the strangest one. It scores 4 stars out of 5 and then calls it 3 out of 4 and then says it's between 2 and 3, 2 to 3. So it's just very strange and contradictory. And then a final example, okay, this isn't wrong, but it's just strange that it switches language in the middle of its report. So the whole report is in English, except for the phrase groundbreaking theoretical breakthrough, which it writes in Chinese. And I've got no idea why. It's just a strange thing in the output. And these are even stranger things. So in very few of the reports, 2 of the models, DeepSeek and Llama, just had a mental breakdown and started writing really strange comments. So my favorite one, and the stranger comment maybe, is instead of evaluating the research, it wrote, "You should not speak unless spoken with authority." So nothing to do with the job it was asked to do. It just completely lost its mind, lost its track of what it was trying to do, and just started producing sentences that didn't mean anything in relation to the task. But just to repeat again, despite this strange output, on average, the model did work. So on average, the model did work. It gave statistically significantly positive correlation with human judgment. And another thing I did with the model to test it, other than reading the reports and the correlation, is I fed some of the different models with a fake article to see if it could detect the fake article. And my fake article is about squirrel surgeons writing research comparing squirrels and humans doing surgery. So it's completely fake. We all know squirrels can't do surgery, squirrels can't do research. But the question is, if I give it to ChatGPT, will it laugh and say this isn't possible, or will it give it a normal score, or will it reject it? And the answer is it just gave it a score. It didn't find it strange at all. It just gave it a score. So it wrote a normal report about it and it scored it 3-star or sometimes 4-star. I entered it multiple times, but every time I entered it, it didn't complain about being given a obviously fake article. So, for example, it reported accounting for various variables like author, species, publication year, and author numbers. And of course, it's not possible to have a bibliometric study comparing the species of the author, because only humans can write articles. So I asked it after this, do you know that squirrels can't write academic research articles? So, and it did know. So I said, yes, of course they can't. They don't have the brain power to write academic research articles. So although it gives the correct response to the question about squirrels, it still evaluated this article about squirrel research as though it was a real article. So it can be fooled. And so I asked other versions of large language models the same question. I put in the same article and asked for an assessment. This is ChatGPT 5, the latest ChatGPT 5. So this also gave the article a score, and it didn't say it was, it didn't realize it was a fake article, though it put species in inverted commas. So it seemed to have some suspicions that it wasn't true. And I asked ChatGPT 03, which is their most expensive model, and it wasn't fooled. So it said, this is a joke article, a satirical article, before it evaluated it. So it realized that there was a problem with the article. And then I tried others, Gemini, Google's large language model, and it also gave it a score and didn't realize it was a fake article. And it claimed that species and citation impact has been studied across other fields like psychology and maths, which isn't true. And DeepSeek also gave it a score and didn't spot that it was a fake article, said it was an important topic, squirrels doing surgery. And this is my favorite comment from ChatGPT. It said the findings of the paper could inform departmental discussions on team composition, authorship, supervision, and other things. So if your boss comes into you next week and says, I think that your research team should include an extra squirrel, then you know your boss has been asking ChatGPT how to do their job. But again, despite these very strange results, statistically, the ChatGPT's results do associate positively with human expert scores. So statistically, it does a good job, despite the fact that it can be fooled and gives some very strange answers. Okay, so that's a summary of part one. Large language models can make huge obvious mistakes, but they are better than trusting to chance, and they work slightly better overall than citation-based indicators for identifying higher or lower quality articles. But be very, very careful if you're using them for peer review, because they're not really doing a proper evaluation of the research that they're given. They're just making educated or pattern-based guesses at the results. Okay, so part two, citations versus research quality against ChatGPT. So I just want to compare the three sources of evidence about the quality of journal articles. So this is quite controversial, so please feel free to come back to me with questions, complaints, or alternative perspectives at the end. And I'd like to start by discussing what is research quality. And there was a paper about this written by Liv Langfeld in 2020. And she looked at over 100 different definitions of research quality, which came from grant funders and national funding agencies. And she looked to see what they included in their definitions of research quality. And what she found was that all the definitions almost always had three common factors. They included originality, rigor, and significance, sometimes calling it impact. And they sometimes split significance into two types, scientific significance and societal significance. But basically, there were three dimensions of research quality. And some definitions included other dimensions like writing clarity, but most didn't. So these can be thought of as the internationally recognized core dimensions of research quality. So if you look at citation data, they primarily only reflect scientific impact or scientific significance, rather than originality, rigor, or societal impact. So citation counts partly reflect only one aspect of research quality. So that would be the case for scientific research quality not being perfectly measured by citations, and why we might want to use peer review for research quality evaluation, because they can take into account rigor, originality, and societal impact, whereas citations can't. Okay. So the first question is, are citations more important than expert judgment of research quality? So some people say yes. Citations are more important than expert judgment because if an article hasn't been cited, then it's not been useful. So, and each citation represents a use of the article. So the more cited an article has been, the more useful it is. And this is essentially a Merton's sociology of science approach, that new authors cite the work of previous authors that they've found influential in their own work. So a citation count is an accumulation of evidence of use. But I would say that's not really true for the reasons given on the previous slide, and for other reasons as well. So citations don't directly reflect originality and significance, originality and rigor, and they don't directly reflect societal influence. And also, many citations, in fact, don't really have much value at all. So they're not evidence of influence, but they're citations that help to make the case for the article. Particularly in the social sciences, I think many citations are included to play quite a weak role in the study, in the sense of supporting the claim for the evidence, but not supporting the research itself. And another reason why citation counts aren't always the best measure, aren't necessarily the best measure, is because we might want to reward the researchers for producing good research. And even if it's not cited eventually, it can still be good research. So allowing expert evaluations of research allows researchers to be rewarded for doing a good job, essentially. So here's an example of this is a randomly chosen paper that I chose because it has a funny title, Finding Badly Drawn Bunnies. This is a real paper, and this is from the Web of Science. It's their enriched cited references graph, and it shows which part of the paper, the position of a reference in the paper, and how important the reference is to the paper. And you can see most of the references, the little black dots, in the background section. So they don't really support the paper, they're just off background interest of the paper. And only a few are in the basis section, meaning that these references form the basis for the new study. So basis or support would be the types of reference that really support this study. So the majority of references for this paper don't really support it, they're just part of the background. And maybe overall 80 to 90% of references aren't really supporting the new research, they're just background. And there's another example, and in this paper, virtually all the references are in the background categorization, meaning that in this case, there are only 3 of the very many references that form the basis for the new paper. So if we count references, we're counting mainly support for the background information of articles and not support for the basis of new articles. So it's so that this evidence undermines the use of citations. So the main evidence we have of the value of citations is that they do correlate with expert judgment in most fields. And that's the reason why in the UK, I think that we've not used citation analysis much. We only have a weak use for it in the research assessment exercise, and we rely on expert judgment instead. And we have done for decades. So second question, are ChatGPT scores more important than expert judgment of research quality? So some people say to me, yes, I want a computer to be used to assess my research because it doesn't have human biases. I'm worried that a human will give me a bad score because they're biased against me. But I would say generally that's not a good idea because ChatGPT doesn't really evaluate research. It just makes a guess based on language patterns. So we can't really rely on its score. So it doesn't actually give us a proper evaluation. So if we want a real evaluation at the moment, we still have to use human experts. But on the other hand, the main thing that makes me wonder is that the human experts are not infallible. Human experts make mistakes. And in particular, many assessments will have evaluators that are not really expert on what they have to evaluate. So although they are experts on some fields, they're given research to evaluate that they're not really expert on. So if we had a ChatGPT, which is making a pattern-based guess, it might be as good as an expert who doesn't know much about what they're actually asked to assess. So, and it will certainly be faster and cheaper than a human expert. So it does make me wonder whether large language models might be faster and cheaper and better than evaluators for some tasks. But I don't know for sure, certainly. Okay, finally, are citations more important than ChatGPT scores? Well, I would argue that the answer to this question comes down to the strength of the correlation, because the ChatGPT scores are only guesses, they're not proper evaluations, and the citation counts are not really measuring the influence of an article because many articles are background citations. So they're Professor Van Raan has come up with an explanation of this, that the citation counts include the noise of research as well as the patterns of references that cite genuinely important research. So the correlation tells you to some sense the signal to noise ratio, whether there are enough good citations compared to background citations. And so if you have to choose between citation-based indicators and large language model scores, then I think that correlation is the best method, since neither have a good theoretical underpinning for them. But we also have to take into account systemic effects and ethical considerations, which I'll mention later. Okay, so part three. So I'm going to talk about the potential for alternative definitions of research quality with ChatGPT, and I'm going to have a case study of Mauritius, which is a small island state off the coast of Africa with strong ties to India as well. Many of its citizens are of Indian descent in Mauritius. And Mauritius is, as I've said, a small island developing state off the coast of Africa. It because it's small and because it's a developing state, it doesn't have enough experts for a UK style research evaluation. So in the UK, we have enough experts to assess all the work that's produced. But in Mauritius, because it's smaller, maybe primarily, but also not as doesn't have as large education system for its size as well. It doesn't have enough experts to do this job. So Mauritius has recently had a new research evaluation strategy developed by Professor Robin Nunku. And this study is based on an evaluation of whether ChatGPT could play a role in this type of analysis. So if we consider, should we use citations or ChatGPT for Mauritius? So we can't use the human expert. So could we use citations or ChatGPT instead? So the reasons in favor of using citations. So if we count citations or have citation-based indicators, then we would be rewarding internationally recognized research competence. So highly cited researchers tend to be internationally recognized researchers. And this will help also in university league tables, which take into account citations. So they will give Mauritius international recognition. So it's good for prestige and university league tables as well. So this is positive things for citations in Mauritius. But you can also argue that citations are bad for research that directly supports Mauritius in other ways. So because citations to a paper, when they're meaningful, tend to indicate contributions to global north research, which dominates the citation indexes. So you could argue that counting citations is counting how much research helps the global north, which isn't what the goal of the Mauritius government is. So obviously it wants to help its own people with the research. So we thought of a Mauritius-specific ChatGPT strategy, which was to change the instructions to ChatGPT to tell it to either give higher scores to topics that are more valuable to Mauritius, or only score articles based on their value to Mauritius and not on the research quality. So we tested both of these and we compared them against a research quality score. So now we're changing the definition of research quality, what gets a high score in Mauritius, based on either only the value to Mauritius or based on skewing the scores towards value to Mauritius. And the way we did this is we changed the instructions to ChatGPT to list all the important economic sectors in Mauritius. For example, food processing, sugarcane is really big in Mauritius, tourism as well, education as well. So we listed in the instructions all the key sectors for Mauritius, and the rest of the definition we kept the same. So this is our Mauritius-oriented research quality definition. And then the alternative we had was, it looks a little bit the same because it also lists all the key sectors in Mauritius, but for the research quality score, the stars are given only for contribution to Mauritius. So you get a 4-star for making an exceptionally valuable contribution to Mauritius under this scheme. So if I go back to the previous slide, you would get a 4-star for quality that is world leading in terms of originality, significance, and rigor, with the significance slanted towards Mauritius. So this is a more general research quality definition, whereas the new one, the brand new one, just considers contribution to Mauritius. So we used ChatGPT to apply this to all papers from Mauritius over I think a 15-year period. And we correlated the different measurements. And I just want to focus on the middle set of measurements. So A, B, C, D in the y-axis. So A is health sciences, B is physics and engineering, C is social sciences, D is arts and humanities. And all of these correlations, they're between the ChatGPT scores for overall research quality and the ChatGPT scores for value to Mauritius. And essentially, these are all close to zero. The correlations are close to zero. And what this is saying is that the international research quality has no correlation with low value to Mauritius. So from a government policy perspective, the government can choose either to reward research that's just valuable to Mauritius or research that's just high quality, and they're completely independent factors. So they give different perspectives. And the Mauritius-oriented research quality was very similar to the research quality overall, had a high correlation with overall research quality and a low correlation with value to Mauritius. So the main decision to make is whether to specify only value to Mauritius in the research definition or include the more general research quality part of the definition. So I'm not saying one of these is right and one is wrong. I'm just saying they are different and they will give different outcomes. And it's a policy decision about which one to choose. And so we couldn't validate directly these results, the two different ChatGPT approaches, because we didn't have correct answers. So we tried to assess what kinds of articles got high scores on the value to Mauritius ChatGPT version, and we found that it did give results, articles that got higher scores that had these themes shown in this table, and all the themes are plausible in the sense that they seem like things that are good for Mauritius. So, for example, fruit is mentioned in one of the themes. One of the themes is fruit. So articles about fruit tended to get higher scores for Mauritius value. And education, again, articles tend to get higher scores for Mauritius value and development. And one odd result was that interviews and surveys tended to get higher scores for value to Mauritius. And I think this is because many of these studies took international research and then translated them to a Mauritius context by doing an interview or a survey of Mauritius. And so that would give value specifically to Mauritius much more strongly than international value, because they wouldn't be developing potentially new theories or methods. Anyway, so this thematic analysis suggests that the method for identifying value to Mauritius does seem to work, at least at a surface level, but this is a very thin evaluation. Okay, so a final important thing to consider if when using large language models and wondering whether they could be used for evaluations is it ethical and legal to use AI to evaluate research? So it might not be legal because of copyright reasons, depending on the purpose that you're using and depending on the country that you're based in when you're doing the study. And it might not be considered ethical to have a computer make a decision about that influences the life of a person. So in Europe, for example, it's not considered ethical or legal to have decisions that influence people's lives made just by a computer. There has to be a human making the final decision. And another important consideration is, would it incentivize good research if we used ChatGPT instead of citations or instead of expert review? And so I don't know the answer to that. So we'd need to have some studies to see whether it incentivizes good research. There are worries that it might incentivize bad research or cheating. And there's already an example of someone writing papers with instructions to ChatGPT hidden inside the papers, telling it to give the paper a high score. So that was a clever thing to do, but not considered ethical research. But I think maybe the most useful application at the moment is triangulating ChatGPT with other sources of evidence as an additional opinion to either to support expert review or to give to compare the results with expert review to give a new perspective on what is good or bad research, or which individual papers are good or bad. Okay, so finishing the talk, to summarize, so large language models like ChatGPT, but also others, can estimate the quality of academic research about as well as citation-based indicators, and better in many fields. They do have advantages compared to citations, that they can consider contributions to research other than just scholarly impact, other types of contribution. They can be applied to brand new research. You don't need to wait for citations to accrue before you apply them, and you can customize them for different research quality definitions. But they do have big disadvantages compared to citations. So copyright restrictions would be a very important thing to check before using them. Incentivizing large language model friendly abstract is a possible disadvantage that we need to see if that happens, if people write their abstract specifically for ChatGPT. And at the moment, a practical limitation is that citations are much more readily available than large language model scores. So it takes more a technical know-how and time to get large language model data than citation data at the moment. Great. So thank you very much for listening. I'll just put my reference slides up if you want to